Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a webinar featuring firsthand experiences and snapshots from MPF's beautiful prairies. Take a moment to get comfortable while others join the call, and we'll get started soon. All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the next webinar in our 2025 series, as we are joined by MPF Vice President of Science and Management, Bruce Schuette, for a digital show and tell of photos of Prairie Splendor. These are taken from years of his personal travels of MPF's managed properties. My name is Amanda Lance Ramrup, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and our 25-year-old Grow Native program. Our webinar begins with a photo presentation from Bruce, followed by a Q&A session facilitated by Lily Gurmaroff, MPF's Conservation Program Associate. Throughout the next hour, we invite listeners to please type your questions for Bruce into the Q&A section of your screen, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. This webinar is being recorded, and a link will be shared with all of you tomorrow, along with resources mentioned during the presentation and Q&A session. We'll wrap everything up near the top of the hour. Now for a bit more about Bruce. Bruce Schuette retired from working for 36 years as a park naturalist at Cuivre River State Park, where he was involved in natural resource management, prescribed burns, invasive plant control, ecosystem management, natural resource inventory, collections, monitoring, working with researchers, and nature education. He has served on the MPF board since January 2000, served as secretary from 2005 to 2012, and is now vice president of science and management and chairman of the Science and Management Committee. We're very fortunate to have Bruce's experience and enthusiasm on board with us today. Thank you, Bruce, and I'll turn things over to you.
Well, and welcome everyone. As Amanda said, I've been volunteering with the Missouri Prairie Foundation since about 2000, and especially in the last, I guess, 10 or 15 years, done a lot of traveling and frequently visiting MPF prairies. So when I get out there, I'm frequently taking pictures of pretty much everything I see. But contrary to what some people might think about, I'm just trying to use up pixels that will fill up memory on my computer. I've actually got some kind of methods behind the madness of why I'm taking pictures. And I guess primarily, I like to take pictures to try to show what's so special about different subjects. And in the case of prairies, with MPF having so many of the remnant prairies that we still have protected in Missouri, I've been hoping to basically photograph a number of the things that make the prairies real special, hopefully in a pleasing manner. I want to try and show the different features and characteristics, but also to try and make them very aesthetically pleasing photos so that they can hopefully impress people as to the value and the beauty of our prairies and why it is important to protect them. So this is kind of a typical scene for some of our prairies in southwest Missouri. That's where most of our prairies are. But the Prairie Foundation now owns 36 properties. Almost all of them have remnant prairies as at least part of the property. And the prairies, even the remnant prairies in the same region, can have different characteristics as far as plant species and animals that are found there, differences in terrain, and when you visit, things like that can make a big difference. So there's lots of opportunities to take pictures of these prairies and show what their conservation significance is. We also have a couple kinds of very unique prairie natural communities that we have protected. In very northwest corner of the state, we have a Luss Hill or Luss Bluff Prairie. And this one has some very characteristic and rare species for this part of the state. In the southeastern part of the state, we've got a couple sand prairies, which have very different, but again, very characteristic and in many cases, very rare species associated with them. We have some limestone prairies, which are one of the rarest prairie types actually we have in Missouri, but fortunately we have several of these. And then most of our prairies are basically found on a sandstone bedrock, sandstone or chert, which is typical for most of the southwest Missouri prairies. Now, I'm sure you've probably seen this map before, but the yellow on this map is the extent of prairie that was here at the time of Euro-American settlement, usually referred to as pre-settlement prairies. And at this time, these open grasslands covered about 15 million acres, roughly 1/3 of the state. Unfortunately, it's almost all gone. The little red you see sprinkled around, mostly in the southwest corner of the state, is what is left of Missouri's prairies. So at one time, Missouri had about 15 million acres of prairie. Currently, that's down to about 40,000 acres of prairie. So only about 40,000 acres of the 15 million is left. That's only about 1/4%. And of that, less than half of that is actually protected in some way or in conservation ownership. Just under 18,000 acres are in conservation ownership. So with that little prairie that's left, I think it's really important to try and show what is so significant, what is so beautiful and so significant and so important about protecting these remnants. We do have much larger areas, and we can have areas where native prairie species are planted, but these are still not true prairies. Remnant prairie has so many things that are part of it and many things we still don't understand. And when we plant native plants, that's a very good thing to do, but it isn't going to replicate what's in the original remnant prairie. And one way we can look at this is through what are called coefficients of conservatism. This is a system that ecologists have developed in the past to look at sort of how tied a native species is to a remnant natural habitat. And so all the species are given a ranking between 0 and 10. Species that are given a ranking of like 0 to 3 are species that are more adapted to disturbance. So they're not telling us this was always a prairie. Species in the 4, 5, and 6 range are still our native species, which are a major component of our native habitats. But then the species that are ranked 7 through 10 are what are called ecologically conservative species, are remnant dependent species. And this is what really keys us in on an intact natural community. In our case here, an intact remnant prairie. So basically, this is also looked at as kind of a way to look at the community complexity and the ecological integrity of the site. And it's really the only way that you can sort of quantify what is so special about our native remnant prairies compared to more disturbed areas. So when I look at a prairie or try and take pictures of it, basically what I'm trying to do is get across what's there as far as the number of species, but also the sort of remnant dependency of these species, which is what makes it so special. If areas are disturbed, these are the species that are less likely to be able to survive or to come back in. So these are the irreplaceable elements it's most important for us to protect. So for example, using this system, Species like the prairie trout lily, the rough white lettuce, Culver's root, like they're given a score of 7. 8s are things like the spring lady's tresses orchid, rattlesnake master, and fringed poppy mallow. 9 would be things like the downy gentian, royal catchfly, and bunch flower. And 10s, kind of the cream of the crop, would be things like the prairie grass pink orchid, blue hearts, and prairie violets. So basically, when I'm looking around a prairie and taking some pictures of it, what I'm thinking about is what are these remnant dependent species that are there and how can I capture those? Because that's what I want to get across to people is the beauty of this native landscape and the things that make it so special, these remnant dependent species. And so again, right here, you can see in this picture, pale purple coneflowers, fringed poppy mallow, white prairie clover, all very highly conservative, ecologically conservative species. So when I see a scene like this, I know that this is a really good site. So I'd rather get across to people how beautiful it is with these remnant dependent species as opposed to, let's say, not so remnant dependent species that may be pretty and are good to have there, but they're not really telling you what an important and conservation significant site it is. So if we expand this out to a larger landscape like here at Gay Feather Prairie, and again, you can see, I think that that's a pretty nice picture, but what I like about it is the diversity. A number of species and several high quality remnant dependent species that tells me that this is a good intact prairie. This is one with a lot of conservation significance. Same here at Stark Family Prairie. And at Schuette Prairie with the yellow cone flowers as well as the pale purple cone flowers. There are also a number of rare species that I'm trying to document for the site. And then also, again, to get across to other people how important it is to protect sites with these very rare species on them. In this case, Barbara's buttons, which actually can be quite common on some of our prairies down in the Joplin area, but it's pretty restricted in its range. So you won't find it on all the prairies, but this is a good indicator of really high quality prairies, this rare species, when you get down into that portion of the state. You find a number of rare species. There's some like this little Kansas arrowhead. It's found in one of its only a few of its locations in the state is on a little wetland area in one of our Joplin area prairies. Oh, then if we go north into one of our driest habitats, the Luss Hills in northwest Missouri, this is the Polson Luss Bluff Prairie, and it's got rare species that you normally find much farther to the west. And so they're adapted to very dry sites. So this is the soapweed yucca. There's also skeleton plant. And you can kind of get an idea in this picture of where the skeleton plant grows. Oftentimes it grows in the very steep kind of Luss Bluff that's on the site, which makes it kind of precarious to try and see this plant. And then also that's why we restrict access to it because it is a very fragile site. And also with this Luss Bluff, a bit of a hazardous site. Then down in southeast Missouri, in those sand prairies, you can find rare species there, like this stylisma, or St. John's wort. In one of only a couple locations, it occurs in the whole state. Other rare plants we have are two federally endangered species or federally threatened species. One of them is this tiny little geocarpon found in sandstone area on Schuette Prairie. And you can see by the penny in one of the pictures what a tiny little plant it is. But it is an extremely rare plant in the entire world. It's only found in a small area in southwest Missouri and just a couple nearby states. And we also have the Mead's milkweed, which is, again, a federally threatened plant found in a number of our prairies, but always seems to be found in pretty small numbers. So it's definitely a plant of great conservation concern. And then there are species of conservation concern for animals in our prairies too. Probably one of the more widespread ones is the regal fritillary, which you can find on a number of the MPF prairies. And on several of the prairies, we have the northern crayfish frog. Very interesting frog that doesn't come out in the open very often. It's usually underground in crayfish burrows, but every once in a while, if you're very lucky, you might find one out in the open. I've only seen them twice. First time was at Schuette Prairie on a very rainy day. Several of us were walking around, and there was the first crayfish frog I'd ever seen just hopping around. And then this one, which showed up just a few months ago at our Prairie Bio Blitz. And at night, it just came kind of hopping through the area where we had a tent set up, and a lot of people were sitting around, and it actually kind of bumped into somebody's foot. And they noticed it, and so that's how we got to see this little beauty here was that very wet night out on the prairie. Now, prairies will look different, considerably different, at different times of the year. So I've tried over the past to get out and visit them at different times to see the differences in what you can find there. So this is one of our prairies in the spring, very notable spring shot with the shooting stars and the puccoon and the violets. But then even earlier in the spring, you have to get out to see this one. This is the prairie trout lily, or well, prairie trout lily. And it's an extremely early blooming wildflower. Pretty tiny one when it first comes out too, but you got to get out awfully early in the spring to see this one. Then as we move into summer, there will be a whole different suite of things in flower. So you can oftentimes know when the picture was taken roughly by what's in bloom, a characteristic suite of species that comes up at different times of the year. So this was Golden Prairie a few years ago with a tremendous stand of the prairie blazing stars, but then also some of the rattlesnake master and a nice ashy sunflower there. And then as you move into the fall, downy gentians are very characteristic of our prairies in the fall. Sometimes they can be even fairly abundant, but they're a low-growing plant, so you really have to look close to see them. It'll only be like very end of summer and into the fall. It's one of the later wildflowers to bloom, but when you do see it, its deep blue color is certainly quite incredible. Later into the fall, things are starting to look quite a bit different. Now, certainly later on into the fall and into the winter, it's not going to be nearly as colorful, and that is during the summer, but it is that's part of the prairie character. When you move into fall, the plants are going dormant, and also they're all either going to or have gone to seed already. So this is a time of the year that you can oftentimes still get an idea what's out, but you'll see them in seed rather than in their colorful flower. And then finally in winter, again, what seemingly is a pretty bleak, barren time, but there's still that's part of the prairie system, and it's still attractive in its own ways. And also, if you might notice, even during this time of year, if it's a good prairie, you can still see the flowering heads, the past flowering heads, the seed heads from many of our conservative species. So even during the winter, you can get an idea on the quality of the prairie by the lead plant sticking up in the left or the rattlesnake master in the right. And once again, now it's actually getting harder to find prairies in snow. I haven't been able to get too many pictures. These, I think, have all been taken in this past winter, because I hadn't been there too many times when we had a good snowfall. But it certainly has a beautiful characteristic when that's the case. But this was kind of an interesting set of pictures. Several years ago, right after we got Thoda Prairie, I went down to help Jared Hubner, our director of prairie management, was going to be burning this prairie. At first, I was a little skeptical because that night it got down to 0. And I wasn't sure how well the prairie would burn when it was that cold. Well, Jared knew what he was doing because the prairie actually burnt very well. But I got out there a little bit early and was walking around. And when I took these pictures, it was below 5 degrees. It was, I think it warmed up from 0, but it was still under 5 degrees. And walking around, it was just amazing. When I got down closer to the stream valley, kind of in the swale, the ice crystals that were just covering all the dried plant stems that were around. And so it was just this absolutely incredible little icy forest all around me. Now, it was extremely cold. It was about all I could take. Getting down on my belly to take these pictures, having to take my gloves off when it was so cold. So they weren't particularly easy pictures to get, but it was just amazing. The beauty out there, even the middle of the winter on an extremely cold, icy day. Now, prairies can be very photogenic at sunrises and sunsets. Anybody that knows me know I'm not very good at getting sunrises. I'm just not particularly a morning person, unfortunately, because they can be very pretty. But sunsets are kind of what I do mostly. To me, they're a lot easier to get to. So again, this is a really colorful way to get an expression of the beauty of the prairie. Like here, the milkweed seeds kind of lit by the setting sun. In this case, earlier in the season, but a setting sun that kind of backlit this Indian paintbrush with still just a little bit of colors in its bracts. On the left is some rough blazing star, and on the right is rattlesnake master. And here are some pale purple coneflowers. But again, you can see some of the really remnant dependent species that you can even work into a beautiful sunrise or sunset picture. But again, shows some of the important aspects of the prairie when you can see the rattlesnake master or other remnant dependent species there. This was a nice sunset a few years ago down at Ray Letzinger Prairie. And in fact, as I was driving down to the prairie that afternoon, it looked like it was going to be a pretty nice sunset. Oftentimes, it's not a particularly special sunset, or it'll kind of look like it, and then the clouds come in too heavy or whatever, and it kind of all falls apart, and it's nothing particularly special. So I was driving down there just with my fingers crossed. And fortunately, I did get to the prairie just as it was really lighting up very nice, and got back out and found this nice rattlesnake master to silhouette in the sunset. And so I think it shows the prairie in a very nice light. In the morning, even after sunset, you can get some really nice effects. This was Golden Prairie a number of years ago. I was down there actually kind of doing a bird survey, and so I got there pretty early. It was wet as you expect, or as you know, prairies are early in the morning. It means if you don't wear rubber boots, your pants and your feet are going to get absolutely soaked. Just as much as if you were walking in water, they can, can really soak you down early in the morning. But you'll get these, fantastic with the dew on the spider web, sometimes even on the spider itself. Here was that same morning down at Golden Prairie. The rattlesnake master, you can see, was actually in flower at the time, and backlit with the dew, just a spectacular effect on this remnant dependent prairie species. And then also that morning, besides the blazing star too, that had the nice little droplets of dew on it. But I was doing the bird survey, as I mentioned. I did run across several sedge wrens. And that early in the morning, you can see even the sedge wren looks pretty soaked. So even he was getting it flying through the grass in the early morning like that. Now, when it comes to just getting pictures of some of the plants and later get to some of the animals, some of the plants are, I guess you'd say, relatively easy to get just kind of a profile picture. They're a good sized flower, several feet above the ground, so it's pretty easy to kind of walk up to it and compose the picture as you would like it. So this Michigan lily was down in Schuette Prairie, and another time over in Coin Prairie. There's little Prairie Creek that runs through it. And along this creek, you can find a number of interesting wetland species, including this cardinal flower, which is always a beautiful thing to see. But sometimes, besides just simply taking a picture of a plant sort of head on, you can get nice effects by having them backlit, having the sun sort of behind it. Sometimes it's hard to get, can be hard to get because you can get a lot of glare from the direct sunlight. But if you can kind of keep that blocked out and just get the subject itself, like with this lead plant, you can get a nice effect on the flower. Here's some fringed poppy mallow. Again, its purple color really shows up nice as it's backlit. And I think this was maybe on Linden's Prairie one day, this cabbage white butterfly that, again, with its white wings, but it was backlit and just has this really beautiful effect to it. Looks like it's just glowing there. Late in the afternoon, you can get some nice effects of the like setting sun or the late afternoon sun on the vegetation. It can give you this sort of nice golden color. This is June grass, I believe, on Denison Prairie. And then one day I was up at Friendly Prairie. It looked like there was a pretty big storm coming. So I figured I didn't have too much time, but I got to part of it, some of the nice parts of Friendly Prairie, which is a very nice 40-acre prairie up near Sedalia. And I was able to get these nice prairie shots with the pale purple coneflower, the rattlesnake master, finger coreopsis with the kind of impending storm, that deep overcast sky. And then same thing down at Schuette Prairie. One time I was down there, very interesting cloud formations, I think made for a pretty interesting shot. And I did get out of the main part of the prairie just in time because the storm really let loose shortly after I took this picture. So it definitely was a storm coming, but I think it gave a nice effect to the prairie landscape. Now, one of the things I like to try and do is show things at different perspectives. rather than just sort of walk around, kind of bend over and take pictures. I'm known by a lot of people as somebody that will get down on the ground, either on my back or on my belly, and really get down close to the ground to get a lot of pictures. I think it's kind of an interesting perspective where we always think of these things as being not really tall plants, maybe a couple feet tall when you walk through them. They come up to your knees or come up to your waist. But if you get down on the ground and look up, it gives you an entirely different perspective when you see these yellow cone flowers sticking up like trees, or the prairie blazing star. These pictures were at Denison Prairie, where there was a big patch of prairie blazing star, and I just laid down in the middle of it and looked up. Here's a different perspective of sand milkweed down at Cuivre Prairie. So again, it's got this unique kind of star-like flower cluster, but here you're kind of looking up at it like it's exploding over you rather than just looking down. And so just a different perspective on that rare Mead's milkweed. Again, pale purple cone flowers, the yellow cone flowers. And here you have not only the cone flowers, but you even have lead plant above you. So quite a different canopy there with June grass, pale purple cone flowers, and lead plant. And if you aren't looking up, but just looking straight out, getting down on your belly is a good way to get I think, a little more intimate photo of the prairie. In this case, in the spring, and sort of kind of eye level with the Indian paintbrush and the shooting stars, and down pretty close to the puccoon and the false garlic. Are different sort of interesting shots you can get. Sometimes you can get something kind of nice with different patterns like the spirals. This is a spring ladies tresses orchid, which isn't really a spring plant. It's more like midsummer, but most of the lady tresses orchids bloom in the fall, so it's early for them, but this is more of a summer bloomer than a spring bloomer. But the ladies tresses orchids have this interesting spiral of flowers going up the stem. Or wood betony, if you're looking down and you see the spiral shapes to their flower clusters. And the purple prairie clover, which these flower heads are almost perfect circles looking down at them. If you look from the side, it's usually going to be like a cylinder, but when you're looking down, you get a little bit different perspective of this really good remnant-dependent species. Grasses can sometimes make for some very interesting photos. In flower, this is the main one there is eastern gamma grass. And the little grasshopper on top doesn't hurt. But interesting shot of this gamma grass actually in flower. And then the lower right one is porcupine grass, which is another good remnant-dependent species of grass, which is not real abundant on our prairies, but it is found on a number of them and has these extremely long awns as part of their seed. And speaking of seeds, the prairie milkweed, when the light is right and their pods are opening and seeds are starting to disperse, is such a gorgeous sight to see. The seeds with all their fluff and the way it disperses the light. But other plants also have some interesting seeds or seed pods. This is cream wild indigo. And the pods on that just had such an interesting look, almost look a little translucent. The prairie grass pink orchid has such an interesting shape, but not only is it a beautiful plant looking straight on at it, as the lower flower is, but being able to see the side view up above it, because it also shows the side shape of the flower, which is very interesting also. So here, able to get both the front shot and the side shot the same time. And then this one day I was walking through a prairie that MPF manages, and I was just amazed. This is, I think, the first time we'd seen grass pink orchids on this prairie, and it seemed like every little ridge I was walking out on this prairie had another group of orchids on it. I think I got up to counting over 100 different grass pink orchids on this one prairie this particular day. It was just spectacular, all of them that were there. And it was also being enjoyed by this katydid, which I thought kind of added a nice little bit of color to the very remnant dependent grass pink orchid. Sometimes in getting pictures of certain things, it kind of helps to know when to look at them. This is a rare species in Missouri called the auriculate leaf false foxglove or eared false foxglove. We have a nice population of it at Snowball Hill Prairie, but if you go out there any afternoon, even when it's in flower, you won't see it. The flowers are only on it during the morning hours, and by midday, that particular flower is done and falls off. So in order to get a picture of this rare species on this prairie, you have to get out there in the morning, otherwise you'll totally miss it. So this one, again, shows what a kind of pretty little rare plant this is, but only if you catch it at the right time. And then this one is a pretty interesting plant. It's called celestial lily, a very remnant dependent species. For a long time, I'd never seen the plant in flower or good in flower, but on one of our prairies near Bolivar, I'd heard that this plant was in flower, and I think we were talking about it, that it blooms in the evening. So I went over to the prairie and I got there about 6:15. And when I was walking around on the prairie at 6:15, I didn't see any open flowers, none at all. But I did see a number of these shoots with what looked like the little buds on top. So I went back to the car for maybe about a half hour, got a little bit closer to sunset, went back out on the prairie, and there were literally hundreds of these celestial lilies in flower. A really gorgeous sight of this very good remnant dependent species, but only in that brief period. I guess it lasts into the night some when you wouldn't be able to see it. But as far as blooming during daylight hours, it was just this brief time period right before sunset when it was in flower. And again, there was somebody else enjoying it too, which kind of shows it's part of the whole prairie ecosystem. And then I also kind of enjoy trying to get pictures of little things that oftentimes people don't totally appreciate because they are so small, and you really have to kind of get down pretty close in order to see them. This is pink milkwort, found on many of our prairies. It's a good remnant dependent species, but very tiny. Pretty little flowers when you see them up close, but they're oftentimes overlooked. Another one that's really, I think, tremendous is this dwarf spiderwort. Again, a very remnant dependent species, only found in the southwestern corner of our state, so it's found on several MPF prairies, but just the very southwestern ones. And you can see on the left the size of the dwarfed spiderwort compared to the wood betony and the Indian paintbrush there. But when you get down and take a look at it, it's just sort of a drop dead gorgeous flower. But you have to get down a little bit closer to really appreciate it. And then sometimes, again, these can be some very special plants. On Snowball Hill Prairie, which is a limestone prairie, so it's kind of got a little bit in common with glades. And you can find the picture on the left is an adder's tongue fern, a very small little fern, but that's it. The little stalk in the middle is where it forms its spores, so that's the entire little adder's tongue fern. Very characteristic of limestone glades or limestone prairies, but they need the limestone, and so it's out there, but it's very small and very inconspicuous amongst the taller grasses. or in the spring, you can also see the two plants in the picture on the left. There's a ground plum and then hairy parsley. These are both plants that have a C value of 10. So very important plants. It really shows the significance of this prairie protecting these high quality remnant dependent species, but both very small plants, hard to see and only in the spring. And then a little bit bigger is the prairie turnip. And this species is, again, not found on too many prairies. We know of it on a couple of them, but this is a really, really good one. I believe this is another 10. So this prairie turnip is another significant one when we do find it. Now, as we move into animals, kind of the same thing. A lot of things are very small, and it's nice to kind of give people a better look at them. The little moth you can see on the rattlesnake master leaf is a tiny little moth that's only a couple millimeters long. It's called Coleotechnites originella, doesn't have a common name, but you only find it on rattlesnake master, nothing else. And it wasn't even known from Missouri until just a couple years ago. But it turns out it seems to be all over the place. On the right, you can see the rattlesnake master head with the kind of brown blotches. Probably where those brown blotches are is where the larva of this moth is in the head feeding away. And so they probably won't develop into seeds right there, but all the other ones will do just fine. But a tiny little moth, but a very interesting plant, that are very interesting little animal that is totally dependent on our remnant dependent rattlesnake master. And then we have many insects, which are generally pretty small ones and fun to try and look at and get pictures. So hopefully people can appreciate them a little bit more and become a little more familiar with them, since they are oftentimes pretty small. This is actually our native mantis, the Carolina mantid. And then out in the prairie, there's a long list of beetles and true bugs like this large milkweed bug. There's many different kinds of bees and wasps. This, I think, is a golden digger wasp. There's a few grasslands that are found in our prairies, different than the ones that pop out in the woods every 13 or 17 years. These are annual cicadas, but they can be quite abundant out in the prairies and quite interesting when you get to see them up close. Grasshoppers can be very abundant, and in fact, I've heard it said that perhaps grasshoppers are actually one of the main grazers out in the prairies because of their abundance and their love of eating the vegetation, the leaves and that this may actually be one of the very important grazing animals out on the prairies. And again, this one, very colorful grasshopper. This one was just by pure luck. Some years ago, I was walking around on Schuette Prairie. There was quite a few downy gentians in flower. And as I walked by one of them, I just happened to notice that it had this grasshopper in it. And so I was fortunate to get some pictures before it hopped away or pulled down inside the flower, but it was just there like that, sitting there like that on its own. And then you also have pink katydids. This is actually, I believe, a common species of katydid, but it's just kind of a rare genetic trait that gives at least the juveniles or immature ones this bright pink color, but they certainly are photogenic when you do see one. And then lots of other kinds of flies and a number of other insects, as kind of get into a few predators. This is a wheel bug, which is a true bug, but is very characteristic because of this sort of wheel-like shape to its thorax. There are a number of different kinds of robber flies, which I think are all predators. And so these robber flies are just really interesting ones to see, although very frustrating to try and get close enough to get a good picture of. Of course, many different kinds of spiders, like this crab spider. And here, one was successful in subduing this katydid. So it's doing its job. Here's a little jumping spider, very tiny. But while I don't have the best macro equipment, was able to get this one pretty good. Pollinators are, of course, extremely important to the prairie and to all of us. So here on things like the purple prairie clover and the showy goldenrod, you can see bumblebees really making some use of them. And butterflies too, this little skipper, which is one of the smaller butterflies, but then some of the bigger ones too. Again, they can be difficult to approach up close, but ideally, if you can get them with their wings up, and if you can get where you're kind of in the same plane as they are, so you can get most all the butterfly in focus. And again, getting down low can be really important. You know, puccoon is a pretty small plant, so getting down to take a straight in shot at the puccoon means I was down really close to the ground. But when you're close to the ground is also a good time to get pictures of a lot of the animals. Grassland crayfish here. I've only seen them a few times, but this was a golden prairie on a rainy evening. Several of us were walking around and we saw a number of grassland crayfish, but this one, you can kind of tell under its tail has a clutch of young ones. Or getting down low is what you need if you want to get a pretty close-up picture of something like the Illinois coarse frog. Little frog, only 1 inch to 2 inches long, a very rare species down in southeast Missouri. But one night a couple years ago in early spring, there was storms moving through the area, and I thought that would probably be a good time to see amphibians moving to a breeding pond. So I drove down in a rainstorm in order to get down there and was rewarded with getting to see both the Illinois coarse frog and the eastern spadefoot toad, which are both listed as rare species in Missouri and only found in the sandy area where the sand prairies are located down in southeast Missouri. And then some of you might be thinking, well, that's kind of a pretty little snake. Well, if that's what you're thinking, I'm sorry to disappoint you. This isn't a snake. It's a lizard. It's called a slender glass lizard. And a slender glass lizard is truly a lizard. It is totally legless, does not have legs, but that's not what separates lizards from snakes. It's actually things like movable eyelids. This lizard can close its eyes. Snakes can't. It actually has a tiny little hole in the back of its head, which is its ears. And snakes don't have ears and can't hear airborne sounds very well. There's other differences too in the scales and that, but this is truly a lizard and not a snake. But the slender glass lizard gets up to several feet long, oftentimes found in prairies. It's very secretive, so you don't see it very long. I hadn't seen one for a number of years, and then fortunately this year I'd seen 2 of them. This was the first one, and again, you can kind of see how cool it looks. But then the glass lizard, over half of it, when you're looking at a complete glass lizard, over half of it is actually its tail. And like with many lizards, their tail is actually adapted to easily break off if something attacks them. So in this case, a glass lizard, slender glass lizard, can actually seemingly break in half. If it broke like right in the middle, it would actually still be just its tail breaking off. So you can see on this one, you can see the upper part of it. You can see where the tail just abruptly ends. That's where its tail had previously broken off. It will grow back again later, although a regrown tail is never as good looking as the original, and you can always kind of tell if it's a regrown tail. But we do have some snakes we see out on the prairies too. This one is characteristic prairie king snake. Sometimes you can see a number of them. One time on a hike on Snowball Hill, there was a group and somebody said, well, here's a snake. It was a prairie king snake. While we were looking at that one, here's a snake. It was another prairie king snake. And somebody goes, here's another one. There were three nice prairie king snakes just real close together. That's a pretty spectacular day. And then there's the eastern yellow belly racer. Now, the eastern yellow belly racer is this is kind of the characteristic color pattern they're supposed to have. But interestingly, in eastern Missouri, when you see a racer, they'll all look like the little picture in the upper right-hand corner. They'll be black with a hint of blue on them. So they're the same species, but the eastern side of the state, they're all this darker color. But on the western part of the state and down in the prairies, at least some of the time, you'll get ones with this more characteristic color that's really pretty, with a little bit of kind of greenish iridescent on its back and the bright yellow underside. Sometimes photos can be good for documenting things. This is a Graham's crayfish snake, a little type of water snake that feeds basically on crayfish, usually just lives in wetland areas. And when we found this on one of our Newton County prairies, it was not only new for the prairie, it was new for the county. So this actually documented the Graham's crayfish snake for Newton County, for extending its range down a little bit farther in the southwestern portion of the state. And then we come to one of the most characteristic snakes that we have in the prairies. This is a bull snake. Probably the largest snake in Missouri. They're noted for being exceptionally good for eating rodents, so a very good snake to have around. Just a very impressive animal. And they are ones that can let you know they're there by their sound. Bull snakes, when they get defensive, they will make this very loud hissing sound as they inhale and exhale, and you can hear it from a ways away. In fact, I'm not sure that that's not how Jared had found this snake, and I'm not sure that's what attracted his attention at the beginning was the sound the snake was making, and then looked down and saw the snake. And then as we come to birds, birds are kind of a different story because with them, it's mostly just very hard to try and get close to them to get a decent picture. But we do have a number of grassland birds. They're not really restricted to prairies, but they do like our grasslands. They just need a grassland environment. So they are typically very abundant on the prairies, even if they're not restricted to them. With dick thistles being probably the most abundant one we have on our prairies. And this one was very nice to sit on the rattlesnake master. And then at Friendly Prairie, this one sat still for a few minutes while it was getting this caterpillar, which shows what their role can be. But probably the most characteristic bird we have on our prairies, or the one of greatest significance, is the Henslow sparrow. Little sparrows, hard to approach, but in a couple cases I was lucky enough to get up close to them. And so this is a species that there is a lot of concern about. And so fortunately they do like and pretty heavily use many of our prairies. And then finally, it is also important to note that in order to protect our prairies, we need to do prescribed burns. But doing the prescribed burns, while it is a challenging thing to do, it is also something that can really be pretty spectacular to see as the flames are going across the grassland. It's just, like I say, a pretty spectacular thing to see. And probably the most unique one I saw was after Jared had started with us. One of his first burns was at Golden Prairie. I went down to help him. We were finishing up burning around the prairie just after it got dark. Other side of the prairie had already been burnt, but we were finishing up this side after dark. The smoke from the burn was going up, but then it was illuminated, I guess, kind of from within by the fire. And it was just this huge, big cloud of golden yellow smoke. It was just really amazing to see it. So I hope you get a chance to get out and visit our prairies or other prairies and other unique natural features.
Bruce, thank you.
Oh,
Wow, what an incredible collection.
okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to relay a few questions.
Sure.
The first of which was someone inquiring before you described the seasonality on the prairie. They asked, do you revisit the site intentionally to see how it changes? But I was just hoping that you could speak more to just that changeover of springtime versus midsummer to late summer prairie.
Yeah, it's just a total and complete changeover. There's totally different species that you'll find. And again, it's ecologically, I'm sure that's why it helps sort of fit in more species. They all have their time, but you'll get some that come up very early in the spring, and by late spring, you may not even be able to see the plant there at all, be totally gone. Some will, keep their stems with where the flowers were going to seed in that. And so you may get still see the plant there, but some of them will totally disappear shortly after they're done producing their seeds. So you'll get the spring group, and then you move into kind of late spring, early summer, midsummer, things like the blazing star and the rattlesnake master. As you move into later summer, you get more of the things in the sunflower family and a lot of the like asters and goldenrods. And then, a few other things into early fall with the gentians being one of the latest ones. But yeah, it's just a total turnover. So you'll see, you'll sometimes see the same plants, but you won't see them in the same condition. If you go out midsummer, you might have seen that one in the spring, but then it was in flower. Now it's already in seeds while other ones are in flower.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so much to be found with multiple subsequent visits, even to the same place. So thank
Yep.
you. And lots of thank yous in the comment and chat. So I hope you're appreciating the gratitude, Bruce. Another question was from Eze, what is a shot that you hope to get that you haven't gotten yet? Are there any shots that you're still looking for?
Uh, yeah, there would be all
Yeah.
kinds of them. A lot of things are just harder to get. Some of the birds and that. Some of the herps, like some of the snakes, are very secretive, and so it's just a stroke of luck to find them. So there's those kind of things. Yeah, with some of the plants. Well, like for example, in one of our prairies, we do have some of the Missouri evening primrose, just a few plants in kind of an open little rocky area. They're much more characteristic of glades in the Ozarks. But we do have a few plants. But again, their flowers, I think they open in the evening. They last into just a little bit of the morning, and then the flowers wilt then, by mid-morning. So several times I've seen the Missouri evening primrose on this prairie, but I've never been able to get there early enough to see them in flower. And there's just all kinds of things that would be on my wish list, and it usually seems best if you're not necessarily, for me, if you're not necessarily going out planning on getting a certain shot, but I just usually carry my camera, and then if I see it, then I try and get some pictures of it. If not, then that's the way it goes.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. There was one question of, what type of imaging equipment, cell phone or camera. These are with camera, but maybe you could
Yeah.
give some stats for the people or some
Yeah,
specs?
I don't have anything real special. It's a digital camera, but it's just a Canon Rebel, so it's just nothing even fancy as far as a camera. But I carry it all over the place, so I really wouldn't feel guilty carrying around an expensive camera the places I drag it to. So it's just a normal kind of Canon Rebel digital camera, just most of them with just a standard 55 millimeter lens. For a telephoto, I've got one that goes up to, I think it's about 200 millimeter, something like that. For a little bit of a telephoto. Again, it's not a real long one, but it's still pretty light to carry around. And as far as, and I don't normally use even like Photoshop or anything. Most of the stuff I do is just sort of cropping and maybe lightening or darkening a little, and I just do that on the like photo software that came with the computer, I think.
Great, thank you. I think that you certainly showed the beauty and you're communicating the rarity of these species. But we got one question here that's just, what is the importance of prairies here in Missouri? And maybe that can tie into just further Bruce thoughts on why we're doing what we do here.
Right. Well, of course, prairies are important for many different reasons. I mean, you can look at the whole prairie complex, and you get all the ecosystem services does as far as like storing water and kind of filtering water that moves through the soil before it goes down into the streams and kind of buffers flows in that. The prairie seems to be very good as far as storing carbon underground in the soil and really storing it more permanently that way. So as long as a prairie isn't plowed up, which would release the carbon, but if it's not, and you have the remnant prairie with the intact soils, that's storing an awful lot of carbon, which is important for helping to keep carbon out of the atmosphere and contributing to global warming or climate change. So you've got those broader ecosystem services, but then you also have the idea of the importance of having all these, well, this diversity, providing sources that people can perhaps use in the future for all sorts of things, medicinal uses, food sources, things like that. And then to just simply having this around. So with the remnant prairies, besides all the ecosystem services, but they also have these very unique species that all evolved around here and evolved with this particular ecosystem. So it's very finely tuned and can have this great diversity of life in it that in many cases can't live anywhere else. So if we do at all value the overall diversity of life that we have as one of our important resources, like here in Missouri, then it's important we have these remnant sites that have all these species that depend on them. And if we lose them, I mean, we've already lost them on almost 15 million acres, but we still have 40,000 acres that do have this tremendous variety. They do have many rare species, and they do have many other species and species we don't even know about that that do depend on this system. And so if we lose these, even if we can keep prairie plantings going and keep a number of things going, but still, if we lose these remnants, we're going to be losing a whole lot of, this biodiversity. And that's without even getting into the soils and just now starting to barely scratch the surface of what's in the soils, the soil biota, and how trace minerals in the soils can determine which kinds of plants can live there, and that determines which kinds of bees and other animals can live there. And so again, in the prairie soils, we don't, without knowing a whole lot now, there's a lot of research going into it, including on MPF prairies, trying to learn about this. But like I say, we've just scratched the surface so far, but we've got all that, and all that potential is going to be totally lost if we don't have these remnants. So that's why, I'm very keen on promoting, plantings wherever we can and trying to bring it back. But still, while we still have, these scattered jewels out there of the original thing, the original prairie, it's just incumbent upon us to try and protect these remnants and make sure that, these species continue to have their chance.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you for this. And I'll pass it over to Amanda for closing remarks, but I appreciate your time. And there's so many people thanking you in the chat. And so thanks again.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for navigating our questions, Bruce and Lily. And before we head off for today, I just have a couple of announcements about upcoming events. We hope that you'll join us for our next webinar that's going to be happening on December 3rd at 4 p.m. It is called Lichens in the Tallgrass Biome, and it is presented by Douglas Ladd, a renowned conservation biologist and plant ecologist with more than 40 years of work. Join us as we explore the unique world of lichens, including what a lichen is and how a lichen functions, as well as their role in our prairie landscapes. We'll have a focus on some characteristics and unusual lichens of MPF sites. Next, keep an eye out for registration to open for our final webinar of 2025 on the topic of cover crops for stormwater management practices. And that'll happen with Chuck Caverly. It'll be held on December 17th at 4 p.m. Continue to keep an eye on our e-newsletter that's hitting your inbox as we open registration for winter activities in December and January. These events and more can be registered for at our websites under the events tabs. While that concludes today's webinar, I do want to give Bruce an opportunity to say any parting words.
Just get out there and explore the prairies and really learn to appreciate those, in some cases, little things, but those things that make the prairie really a special ecosystem.
Thank you, Bruce. I captured a lot, and so has Lily, from our conversation today to include in tomorrow's follow-up email. And it's just been so awesome to be able to see all of your photos here, ones that we use on our websites and our materials that are related to all of our events and webinars. And it's just great to see the story behind each and every one. So thank you, Bruce.
Thanks.
Have a great night. Bye.